Hey America, my name is Richard Rist, and I plan on running for president in 2028. I'm an outsider to politics, but I wanted to get into this race because our government is completely dysfunctional, and I'm sick of it. I'll be running as an outsider, and it won't be easy, and I'm going to need voters from both sides of the aisle if I'm going to have any chance to win. I have a lot more to say about that in the future, but tonight I want to talk about the recent government shutdown. There's been a lot of lying and finger pointing, and blaming, blame shifting, deflecting, and nobody taking accountability for this shutdown. And I have to say, now I'm going to be respectful as I can be because, I didn't vote for President Trump because I didn't like his economic policies. I didn't like his policies for health care, and so much that he didn't give any details about his policies. For example, health care. We passed the Affordable Care Act, better known as Obamacare, back in 2010. And that program has been around now for 15 years. And a lot of people have come to rely on that program. Now, when President Trump ran for president in 2016, he claimed that he had a much better plan for a healthcare system, which he would reveal. Then, once he won the election, and he would be asked about it from time to time, and it would always be, oh, it's going to come out in a couple weeks. It's going to be great. And yet that plan never came. Now we're in his second term. And again, when he was running, he claimed to have a great healthcare plan. And even recently, he said, yeah, he's got a great plan, and he's going to tell us about it in a couple weeks. So I'm not real confident about that. Maybe he has a plan, but I wouldn't blame him if he didn't. It's a very complicated issue, and you got to really get into the numbers, and it's a lot of weeds there. And so he may have overestimated what it would take to put together a new plan. So here we are, right? So the government is shut down because, in large part, because the Republican senators don't want to extend the health care subsidies to Affordable Care Act. And there are other reasons having to do with Medicaid and Medicare. I'll get to those in a second. But before I get there, I want to talk about the ACA, the Affordable Care Act. Now, back in the day, you may not remember, but there was that bill was very controversial, and there were talks of death panels and the like. And but it passed, and we've had 15 years now, and none of those catastrophic consequences ever happened. And so people have become to rely on it. And who relies on it? Well, you would think, hearing the Republicans talk, that only Democrats are relying on it. But let me tell you this, it's not Democrats who rely on it. It's a lot of people. The people who work in small companies, small businesses, retail businesses, service businesses of various kinds, where they don't have health insurance. And so their only way to get access health care is to go through the Affordable Care Act. At least it's affordable anyway. It's all income-based, and so the less you make, the less your premiums, and so on. And there might be some issues with the Affordable Care Act, but what you don't hear is anybody talking about how to fix what we already have and been in place for 15 years. All they ever want to do is just scrap the whole thing with nothing to replace it. And as difficult as it was to get past the first time, I'm not hopeful that they would replace it anytime soon. But it's not just the low-wage workers who, without health care, that buy into the ACA. There's a lot of people who are self-employed. They also would find buying health insurance on the private market to be cost prohibitive. So it works a lot for them too. And that enables startup businesses where they may not make much money in the early days to at least have affordable health care for their family. And that's important. So here we are being tied up with this issue when really Democrats and Republicans should be in agreement that we should extend the health care subsidies for the Affordable Care Act. There may have been Republicans who hated that bill at the time, and President Trump may hate it just because Obama was associated with it. But the fact is, it's passed, it's law, it's been the law for a long time, and now you just be pulling something away from people who they're not Democrats. If you thought you were just going to hurt Democrats and get even in some way, that's not what's happening. you're going to be hurting Republicans too, all over this country, every state. Now I want to talk about Medicare and Medicaid. And they made major cuts to the Medicare and Medicaid program, and now they're tying all that up too. And let me tell you who's affected by that. You might think again that it's Democrats. It's not Democrats. It's Democrats and Republicans. If you have a parent, a senior parent, and all they have is their Social Security to live on, they rely on their Medicare. And if you go to hospitals, they go in nursing homes, and that's not going to be covered if these extensions aren't made. And then Medicaid, you might think, well, Medicaid, that's for the people who are lazy. I hear all kinds of crazy things that come from Republicans. That's just not true. You go to West Virginia, you go to Kentucky, you go to anywhere, these red states, and you'll find there's a lot of poor people who rely on Medicaid. Some of them have health concerns, they have mental health concerns, they're unable to work for a lot of different reasons, and so they rely on Medicaid. So it's not just people who are taking advantage of the government that are, recipients of this stuff, and they're not just Democrats and not just Republicans. Poverty does not know a party. And so it's a real mistake what's going on here, and they're tying the whole thing up, just because they don't want to extend these programs that have been in existence for a very long time. Now, I know what the problem is, right? Back when they passed the big, beautiful bill, they made big tax cuts for the very wealthy. I'm not talking like, people who've done well for themselves. And let's say you own a business, you did good for yourself, maybe you make $1 million, $2 million a year. We're not talking about those people. They're doing really well, and they could probably, don't need a tax cut as much as they might like. But we're talking about people who are $100 million a year, $200 million a year, $1 billion a year, and so on. If those people paid another 1% tax rate, it would cover these kinds of programs for the very needy. And I don't think they're going to be crying about it. And number two is this. These the wealthy people and all, they could certainly pay more, but it's not just that. President Trump came into office, and between he and Elon Musk, they came in and they began slashing all these programs, international aid, all kinds of studies, health studies and research and so on from the various universities. So where did all that money go? If they saved all this money, then why is there such a budget crunch right now to cover these things? And then there's the tariffs. My goodness, Trump is constantly bragging about how much money these tariffs have brought in. Now, I don't think these tariffs are going to hold up. I think these tariffs are going to go away by the courts. I think if they don't, then they're going to go away with the next administration, right? So the very plan about these tariffs was poor from the get-go, because the whole plan that Trump had was to onshore, manufacturing here in the United States. But that's just not going to happen, because these companies will just stall and wait until the next administration comes, and all these tariffs will be lifted. Honestly, I think they're going to be lifted by the court, because I don't think the president has the right to tax the American people like that on his own. Has to go through Congress. You might remember just quick history. One of the founding acts of the founding of America was the Boston Tea Party, and the whole issue there was that things were being taxed here in America and sent back to England, and yet we had no representation in England, for how the taxes were levied. And so the saying back in the day was no taxation without representation, and that became one of the very fundamental things about America. And so that's why things that tax American people are going to go through, have to go through Congress. But I want to talk about something else real quick. Since Trump came, President Trump, I try to be very respectful of him. I didn't vote for him, but he is my president too, and so I try to be respectful. I think anyone's open to criticism, so I hope you understand that. But he came into office and he was going to lower prices and going to help the Americans in so many different ways, and yet none of that stuff has materialized. We've seen inflation creeping up. I think there's more inflation to come as these tariffs work their way through warehousing and onto the shelves and things. We've seen the cost of cars go up. We've seen the cost of electricity go up, housing go up. It's just getting out of control, and America's getting squeezed. And If you think about the typical budget, what you look at housing, food, um, healthcare, all these things, and they add up, which brings me to a point here with the government shutdown now. Now people's food assistance is at risk. Now that's awful. If you're a conservative, I think that you can say, hey, you know what? I'm a compassionate person. Maybe my church even supports the poor, and we're doing missions around the world to help people who are needy. And so, the fact that we would, be taking food away from hungry people, that's just awful. And let me tell you, it's not just unemployed that receive food assistance. It's also working poor. If you look at what a low-wage earner makes, and then you compare that to housing and electricity and insurance and all the things that go into just a basic budget, you'll see that there's a shortfall right away. And so, people are going hungry in this country, even under the best of circumstances. So, you can be conservative or you can be a liberal. It doesn't matter where you are on the spectrum. We see the government as a place where, we take care of the less fortunate in this country. At least that's how I always believed it. The rich people don't need a lot of help from the government. It's those less fortunate that do. And sure, the government supports the common good for everyone, but when it comes down to it, I think we have a responsibility as a people to take care of the weakest among us. And that's just my philosophy, but I could see if you believe in more of a survival of the fittest mentality. But just remember that the people who you're talking about here are not, just Democrats. They're Republicans too. And what kind of world we live in where we don't want to take care of the weakest among us? I just don't want to be a part of that. So here's what I'm going to tell you. There's something you can do about it. You can look up your congressman on the, I think it's congress.gov. I'm gonna have to confirm that. What I'll do is I'll put that in the description below, and you can click on that link, and it'll take you to a government site. You put in your zip code, and it'll tell you who your representatives are. And I'm talking to Republicans in this case. I think most Democrats are already on board with these extensions, but I think that your Republican congressmen need a little push here, because I think the president's telling them, don't do anything, because we can make it look like it's all the Democrats' fault, and that'll help us in the midterms. But I don't think anybody's buying that anyway. Recent polls I've seen, Republicans are taking the heat on this anyway. So I think they just need a little more fire under their butt, and I think we're going to, get them to, to roll over. Can you believe Republicans in the House of Representatives have been on vacation for a month just to avoid all this stuff? This and Jeffrey Epstein? It's unbelievable. What a dereliction of duty. I'm a veteran, and if I just walked off duty for a month, I'd be court-martialed, right? So certainly wouldn't keep my job, that's for sure. And so, I think we should hold our congressmen to the same standard as we would our military. Wouldn't you agree? I mean, they're the highest level people in this country, right? So I just want to say, that, sometimes I think the president, he might mean good, or he might have a certain strategy in mind, but sometimes I think he gets bad advice. Sometimes I think he knows knows less than he thinks he does about these complicated issues. And I know it's easy to do. It's I'm reminded of guys sitting in the barber shop or having beers in a bar and talking shit and coming up with all kinds of crazy ideas. Nobody would actually move forward with those ideas, because they're just lay people. They don't really know the details. But it doesn't stop them talking about it, right? And they're fun conversations sometimes, but you don't actually go out and do it. You have a little more restraint about that kind of stuff. And you certainly wouldn't want your congressmen and senators behaving in that way, because people just do it for fun. So I just want to tell you to, reach out to your congressman, because I think they need a little push. This government shutdown is completely unnecessary. The president has provided no leadership on this issue. He barely talks to Democrats at all. And Democrats are holding the line, I think rightfully so. They're representing, when they fight for this, they're not just fighting for Democrats, they're fighting for Republicans too, because Republicans use these programs just as much as everybody else. And so, again, I'm going to leave it off there. I'm going to have a lot more to say about politics in days to come. I'm going to have smaller, shorter videos on various topics. I'm going to give you my life story and how I got here. I think you might find that interesting. But for now, I'm going to cut off here, and thank you for listening, and peace out. Good night.